Welcome to another episode of Meal Prep Monday. I'm your host, Allison Schaaf. Today we are revisiting a topic that is popular among a lot of you, and that is picky eating. I am actually wanting to title, I don't know if we'll stick with this title, but I want to title this episode, I Didn't Think They Would Go For It. I'll explain more as we get into the episode what I mean by that. So at Prep Dish, the topic of picky eaters and how to handle picky eaters or my kids won't eat that is something that comes up a lot. A lot of our customers have kids at home. And of course, when you're trying Prep Dish, like one of the benefits is, exposing you to a wide variety of foods, sometimes foods that maybe you haven't tried, new vegetables or a new grain, and getting your family to go for it and eat that food can be tricky sometimes, right? And this is something that we care a lot about at Prep Dish because what good is Prep Dish if no one eats it, right? Like that, that's kind of like the bare minimum goal is that everyone has to eat it. I mean, obviously like our larger goal is that everyone enjoys it and loves it and raves about it. That's ultimately the goal. But to start, we have to get people to actually try it and eat it. And how do you go about that with kids? Knowing that each kid is different and maybe for some kids, it's not a big issue, but for others it is. Anyway, we're going to get into more of that in today's episode. So before going any further, the kind of idea behind or inspiration behind today's episode is to also introduce you to an upcoming challenge that we have that's going to be starting on June 4th. And this is something we've never done before. We've done a lot of various topics for our challenges, everything from, freezer and pantry cleanouts to, doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know. We've done a lot of different topics over the years. But one thing we've never done, and it's always kind of been in the back of our minds, is a challenge created specifically to help families that are dealing with picky eaters. And so that's coming up. And in creating that, I thought it would be a good time to revisit it here on the podcast. I will link in the show notes past episodes that we've done on this topic because it is something I've talked about before. We also have some blog posts on it. But today I have kind of a few new things to add in there, things that have come up in building out this challenge and just things that have come up kind of in my life and with my kids. As my kids get older, the challenges change. I do think there is a time where, from depending on how you approach feeding, like a lot of times the baby stage, anything you put in front of them, they just kind of play with and try and eat. And then, you enter the toddler phase and, they have opinions, right? And they want to have opinions. And that's very healthy and normal part of development for a toddler. But how do you deal with that? So let's start with I didn't think they would go for it because that is kind of one of the inspirations behind this. So there is a dear friend that was cooking for us. I had left the kids and she was going to cook dinner for them. And I had left, kind of instructions on there was, I think, ground turkey, some sort of ground meat and marinara sauce and pasta, kind of like a very easy to throw together. I know they like it kind of meal. And I said, oh yeah, and there's a bag of baby spinach that you can throw in with the marinara sauce. And I get home that night and I asked how dinner went. And it sounds like, it went great. The kids loved it, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't put in that bag of spinach. And this was the quote, I didn't think they would go for it. So this phrase is something, and maybe you've heard yourself repeating it, either in your head or maybe even in front of your children. So this is something that I would encourage you to really think about and be intentional about in terms of thinking it or saying it out loud. Are you already imparting, I don't know if that's the right word, are you already putting into your kid's mind, like, are you determining what they will and will not go for? Are you deciding before you even put anything on the plate? Because if so, whether it's said out loud or even in your head, they catch on to that, right? If they're like, mom doesn't think I'm going to like it, they're already going to think, oh gosh, I'm not going to like this. And that might be true for some kids. Maybe you put spinach in there and they're just not going to eat that marinara sauce. My kids probably thought it was strange there was nothing else in the marinara sauce, because I don't know that there's a time that I've made marinara sauce and not put in mushrooms or chard or spinach or carrots or, some sort of like extra vegetable to just kind of bulk it up. Not to sneak it in. That might actually be another episode. I'm not big on like, oh, I have to sneak in vegetables to my kids' food. There's nothing wrong with adding in extra vegetables or adding some vegetables to the smoothies and doing all of that. But I'm not of the belief that we need to like sneak in vegetables to our kids' diets, because that's not really teaching them to love and enjoy vegetables, right? Like that's the goal, is like, to have them want to eat a vegetable, and it doesn't need to be like snuck into their food. And with the spinach, I would argue I'm not actually trying to sneak it in necessarily, right? Like if my toddler sees it and says, "What is that?" I'll say it's spinach, and it's not a hidden food really. But kind of going back to I didn't think they would go for it. So that's something that I am going to speak to a little bit more during the challenge, in terms of, can you reframe that? And, like, are you already deciding what your kid is going to and not going to like? And to go further down that, path of thinking, just because a kid didn't like something one night doesn't mean the next night they're not going to like it. And that can just be because, kids are still deciding what they like and what they don't like. And sometimes, and I've noticed this especially with my 3-year-old, he's deciding whether or not he can have an opinion on things, right? Like, he wants to have an opinion, and it doesn't necessarily match with like how he actually feels about something. He just wants to be able to make a statement, "I don't like this," and me to be able to validate and be like, "Okay, I hear you. You don't like that. Like, you can have an opinion." And when he says that, I've noticed it's not always like making an actual statement about preference. It's more like, "Hey, I want to be able to state my opinions and you listen to me." So, making sure that you don't have these, beliefs that you're thinking, "Oh, he's not going to go for it," and then not giving them foods based on that. And especially if they haven't had it prepared a certain way. So this is something I think about a lot. And I talked about this with my personal chef clients. Like they would say, "Oh, we'd go through an interview about all their preferences before I'd start cooking for them." And, they'd say, "Oh, I don't like Brussels sprouts." And anything that someone says they don't like, I have to kind of go through the conversation of like, okay, I won't, I'm obviously not going to like give you your first menu with tons of Brussels sprouts, but over time, I think it's important to try that again, because it's not maybe that you don't like that food. It's like, maybe I don't like boiled frozen Brussels sprouts, but maybe if they're roasted with some bacon, they're delicious, so maybe it's actually the way they're prepared. And the same can be true for our kids is, first step, hey, they can still change their mind and change their opinion, and their taste buds change over time. So they can just flat out change their mind. And two, like they might like it a different way when it's prepared a different way. So I would never go into thinking like, "Oh, my kid is just not going to like that," is like a generalization. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about was Swiss chard frittata. So one night earlier this week, I decided to make a frittata for breakfast. And frittata is just, it's a quiche without a crust, basically. So it's, when I look at it, it's taking some vegetables. Basically, I had a lot of leftover vegetables after the end of the weekend that I needed to go through. So I thought, let me just roast them and cook them while we're eating dinner. And then after dinner, I'll mix them up with some eggs, and then we can throw them in the oven for breakfast tomorrow. And egg cracking is something that I've always looking for what are some appropriate tasks that my kids can do in the kitchen. This is something we will talk, I think maybe even like a full week that we talk about this with the challenge of like how to get your kids involved in the kitchen so that they can be more invested in the meal, right? And, with a 1 and 3-year-old, you really have to filter what they can and can't do. Although I do try and keep an open mind and realize they are capable of more than you and I usually give them credit for. And my 3-year-old, very good at cracking eggs. The 18-month-old, I gave him an egg and he cracked it. He has a totally different method than his brother. It's very interesting to me to see the different kind of methods they come up with and how they process things and how they learn things. But, with Ivan, he kind of learned early on. He was a pro. He has his, very specific method. He was kind of got it right away. And hey, 7 can crack an egg. I think for his age, he does a fine job, but definitely approaches it differently than his brother did. So that's something we're working on. And so when it came to make time to make this frittata, I pulled up the learning tower and said, why don't you boys crack some eggs for me? So I gave them, kind of the whole setup, and they went through and cracked the eggs, and I mixed in the Swiss chard, and we had this frittata ready to go. And actually there was another one that was, I think, mushrooms and broccoli. Again, this was just not really based on a recipe or anything. It was just based on, this is what I had in my fridge. Oh, and the Swiss chard one actually had some green onions that were added because I had some green onions that were left. So I mixed those up, put them in the fridge. Next morning I wake up. We didn't get up as early as I thought we would. And so I actually, in my mind, was like, okay, we need to kind of get through things quickly this morning. Maybe we'll switch and do the frittata tomorrow. Because, you have to, I hadn't baked them through the night before, so I knew it was going to take some time. So like, maybe we'll switch it up and do a smoothie. When Ivan wakes up, he comes into bed with us, and he always likes to ask what's for breakfast. And so I had said a smoothie, and he looks at me and says, no, in that little toddler voice. He said, frittata. So that was my cue. So we made the frittata, and I will say, my kids are great eaters. There are times, especially with him, where he'll, he doesn't like something, and that's fine. Anytime my response, if he says, I don't like this, I say, that's fine, then don't eat it. That's all I do. I don't really kind of make a big deal about it. But with that, he wanted to try the frittatas, and I cut him some of the Swiss chard frittata. He ate it. He kept eating it. I think 3 pieces in, we'd polished off the entire frittata. By the end of breakfast, he was pretty upset that there was not any more Swiss chard frittata. So, and brother followed along and gobbled it up as well. Now, had they not cracked the eggs and made the frittata the night before, would they have gone for it? I'm not sure. Sometimes they go for things like that. Sometimes they don't. Again, I don't go into it with an idea of what they're going to go for and what they're not. They can change day to day, hour to hour, what they like, what they don't. I just try and kind of be there to observe and support whatever they decide there. But with that Swiss chard frittata, I happen to think, maybe he would have gone for it. I don't know that he would have done 3 servings and been asking for more, and then been upset when it was gone had he not participated the night before. So that was, pretty eye-opening. I feel like over the past 2 weeks, I hadn't had him in the kitchen as much with me. When life gets busy, I'm definitely don't have them in there every time I'm prepping and helping and doing all of that. But every time I do, it's kind of a reminder, like, yes, there was a lot of egg whites on the floor. Did I mention Seven's egg cracking technique? Well, yeah. So the egg whites were mainly on the floor, but he always got the yolk in the bowl somehow. And I give them a separate bowl to crack it into. But anyway, so yeah, it was a mess. But the next day, definitely a reminder of like, oh yeah, this is really like, it pays off when it comes to mealtime, because they were definitely both invested in that meal and did a great job there. And then circling back to leaving the commentary out. I don't know if I've done an entire episode on that, but this is something, and especially, and I'm kind of living through this. Like, I don't have a 5-year-old. I don't have a teenager. I have a friend with a teenager, and she has her own struggles with him, and like, giving him his own choices and autonomy to like make his choices on his food, and does he eat what the family eats and all of that. So I know, like, I'm still kind of learning as I go here, and by no means an expert. But with the 3-year-old, the thing I've noticed is over time, more of what I feel like when he's making a statement about him liking or not liking something, it kind of comes back to this is him wanting to have an opinion and be heard. And, very normal part of toddler and development is wanting to kind of rebel against the parent already, like wanting to have their own opinion. And challenge anything that's said to him. So when the plate goes down and he says, I don't like this, I don't fight that. I just say, okay, okay, buddy. And it's really interesting because half the time he sticks through it with it the whole meal. Now, I don't know that he's ever stuck with anything over time, but through the whole meal, sometimes he'll stick with, I don't like it. But the other half of the time, a few bites in, he sees everyone else eating it and then he eats it. And I don't make a big deal like, oh, it turns out you like it. I don't even, no comments there. Just let him do his thing. So I think the more you can kind of leave out the commentary, and this goes also for the very well-intentioned, oh, this is so yummy. Don't you love this? The more you do that, like, they're smart kids and they will pick up on that, and they will go back to I want to rebel, or I want to kind of challenge what you're trying to do here. And they pick up if you're trying to sway what they like and don't like. Now, my tactic, and the one that I think is kind of tried and true and what works, I model the behavior, like I sit down, I eat the vegetables, I enjoy them. My husband does, like the whole family, we sit down, we eat the same food, we model the behavior. They pick up on that. They know that I'm not, trying to manipulate or, kind of get them to do a certain thing. They just kind of see what I'm doing, and not to say that every meal is perfect and I sit down and eat my vegetables and he follows suit and eats his vegetables. We've had meals where he doesn't eat. We've had meals where, he throws his food. We've had meals where, we've gone through a lot of the things. So it's still not like, oh, this is just so easy, it is a toddler. But overall, that method seems to really kind of work for us. And it's just something I'm very aware of, like the talk that goes on at the table. And that's one of the takeaways from today's episode is I'd love for you to kind of think through and listen to what you're saying or thinking as you're feeding your children. And is it being helpful? Even if it's well-intentioned, right? Like, is it really kind of working? And this is something in the challenge that we'll go through. So circling back to that, with the challenge, so some of the pieces that we're going to go through, first, we do have some guest speakers that are going to come in. So one of those is Katie Kimball with Kids Cook Real Food. And I've talked about her before on the podcast. She does cooking classes for kids, and I'm just such a fan of the work that she does. So she's going to come in and speak with all of you on a Facebook Live. But to start out, we're going to talk about kind of the different kinds of picky eaters there are, and how to deal with that. And, also recognizing that it's not always about the food, the kind of food that's being served. Again, like maybe it's the toddler trying to have an opinion, but also kind of addressing sensory issues, because a lot of times there can be sensory issues involved. And that's a whole different ballgame than like, oh, my kid's just not eating that because they're being picky. So really kind of trying to take a step back and be like, what's going on here? And coming at it and not trying to, force something in a way that it shouldn't be forced, if that makes sense. And a really cool thing about the challenge is this was not created, designed by me and solely by me. This is really a group effort with the Prep Dish team. And the really cool thing there is everyone, on the team has kids and different ages, different food preferences, sensory issues, not all of the things. And we got input from all of us. So, yes, like I have kind of my experience and all of that to share, but there's so much value in what all the other ladies on the team have to share. And there is another dietitian on the team. So it's really nice to have kind of both of us to kind of brainstorm these things. But just know that when you're getting the content, it is kind of coming from that perspective. And so it kind of starts out with kind of that stepping back view of like what's going on. And then the next few weeks, there's a week where we talk about meal planning, and the kids actually get to plan a week. Not a week, but they get to plan a meal. We have some really cool experience shares from someone on the team that has actually done this in the past with her kids and goes through kind of that process. So that's a really cool exercise. And then the third week is getting the kids in the kitchen to cook. So it's an actual meal plan, similar to Prep Dish style. But it's, it's one meal, and we kind of walk through and like different levels for different kids. Like, I'm looking at it. So actually everyone on the team right now, we're doing it. We're actually in the process of doing the meal plan with our families. And it's interesting because, with my family, like, okay, my kid is going to turn the blender off and on, but then, someone else's child is actually going to be doing the chopping. And, just each family will be having the kids take part in different ways, but it does really work for a lot of different ages and age groups. So that's the setup. And again, it kicks off on June 4th. So if you want to sign up, it's prepdish.com/challenge. Now, if you are a Prep Dish subscriber, if you're a premium subscriber, you get the challenges for free. Anytime we have a challenge, you get it for free. You just have to sign up because we don't want to send you all the emails and all the content if you don't want it. So there's an email that you'll get and you can just click a button. Yes, I want to join. And if you're wanting to join and you've been considered a subscription, then, sometimes it's worthwhile to sign up for the premium subscription because you do, like I said, get all challenges. This year we have 3 that are going on. So you get access to all 3 of those for free. So there's that as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that I want to point out. I mean, this is definitely a topic. As you've noticed, I've gone a little long on this episode. I can talk a lot about this. I'm just very passionate about, getting kids to really enjoy healthy eating and getting them to sit down and have a meal that's enjoyable. So with this challenge, that's, really kind of the ultimate goal is to sit down and enjoy family meals and enjoy eating the healthy food and have your kids modeling that behavior and, enjoying their time as well. So hopefully this is something that all of you can take part in, and we would love to have you join. Yeah, I think that's everything I have for this week. I'll be back next week with another episode. And if you do join the challenge, I will see you there. I will be doing a Facebook Live as well. So again, would love to have you there with us. And we kick off on June 4th. So that means you have to sign up by Friday, June 3rd, if you want to join, just to make sure you can get in on it, because it is kind of a set time. So that's all for this week. I'll be back again next Monday with another episode.